Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is Tyler from the Unleashing DePIN Podcast, and I'm excited we are back with another special guest. We are joined by Rishi from Mycelium. Hello, welcome. Good morning. How are you doing?
Good morning. I'm doing great. Glad to be here.
Likewise. I'm glad we got a chance to chat. So a little context for everybody. Your colleague and friend, Metalite, we converse quite frequently on the DePIN topic. So I know a little bit about what you guys are doing just from all of the amazing conversations that he and I have. But I'm excited to chat with you because you are on the forefront of doing some pretty incredible things for the space. So I'd love to just jump into it. How did you get into DePIN? What was kind of your first introduction? Let's maybe start with there and we can level set and get into everything that you're building.
Yeah, so I kind of got into DePIN before DePIN was DePIN. Kind of goes back to the summer of 2020. It's like COVID summer, lockdown summer.
Yeah.
Everybody was stuck at home, working on their computers, through Zoom, kids at home, kids running around, just a lot of adjustments. I was also at home and just kind of hanging out. I was getting kind of bored, actually. And so I decided I would do this. I would pick up some house projects. And one of the house projects I picked and I regretted later was to build a whole rock patio and lay 2 tons of rocks, just for a nice little outdoor space. But yeah, I was outside hauling rocks and kind of doing that whole thing. And I kind of caught myself sneaking back inside to take breaks, getting on my computer and looking up this thing called helium. And I don't know exactly how helium came across my radar, but once it did, it just kind of stuck. Like I could not make myself unaware of that. And it was something that really just kind of stuck with me. And I just had to work through it. And about 2 or 3 weeks later, I just had to dive right in. And so we ordered a bunch of hotspots, started putting them up everywhere. And that was my first start. That's how we got into DePIN.
That's awesome. There definitely seems to be a theme with folks getting in because of helium. That was the big catalyst for a lot of folks. And so it's incredible to hear that continues to be a driving factor in what has become this new revolution we call DePIN. What were you doing before? Well, I mean, obviously you were laying rocks, but professionally, what were you doing before you were full-time diving into DePIN?
Yeah, so I went to school for finance and accounting and then became a CPA and worked at a Big Four accounting firm auditing SEC regulated companies, which was super boring for me. A lot of great experience, but I spent a couple of years doing that and really kind of got a glimpse of the corporate landscape and kind of learned how business worked, learned the language of business a little bit. But I learned really quickly that was not for me. It was just really boring for me. And I knew I needed to do something kind of a lot more exciting. So did that for a couple of years and moved into an opportunity that I had to kind of work in small business. Worked on the ownership and management side of a restaurant franchise and spent about 5 years doing that. Learned a whole lot about the ins and outs of business, top down, everything. And working with people, hiring, firing, just all the little things that you don't think about. And a lot of stuff that I never got the experience with on the corporate side of stuff. And,
Sure.
Was able to scale that business from 3 locations to 9 locations in just a couple of years. So got a lot of experience in scaling efficiencies and just operating a business. Then I moved to Northwest Arkansas after that and kind of got into some real estate stuff, some design work, just all kinds of just entrepreneurial passion chasing, I guess is what you could call it.
Sure.
Throughout this whole time, going back to when I left my accounting job and really kind of got into business, within that same year, I had a buddy, this was 2011, who exposed me to Bitcoin. And just like the helium thing in 2020, back in 2011, when I heard about Bitcoin, that also just kind of broke my brain. Like it fundamentally changed everything for me. And so over those like 10 years, I really kind of watched the industry. All right. Like you used to be able to mine Bitcoin on your computer. We tried doing that back in 2011. I've got some funny stories about that, but really just like watching that initial decentralized network get more centralized over the years. And just watching the miners, which was us and could be anybody, turn into these giant companies and, hydropower dams and warehouses around the world. And, it hardly seemed centralized. But I was watching the Bitcoin industry, keeping an eye on crypto. Like I had already bought into it. But it just seemed like there wasn't a whole lot of true innovation in those early days. And so, you fast forward to helium, and it was just like, holy cow, we can use blockchain to apply the same concepts as we did to Bitcoin with money to data. So it was really just me being an entrepreneur, me trying out a bunch of different things, me failing at a bunch of things, and just waiting for something that made a lot of sense to me. And that was helium in 2020.
That's awesome. I'm curious because one of the things that's interesting when I talk to folks in the DePIN space is that there seems to be more people who weren't into crypto beforehand. Do you think that you would have gotten into helium as much as you did if it wasn't for getting exposed to Bitcoin back in 2011?
That's a good question. I mean, I feel like it was kind of destiny in some ways, but then in other ways, I had the bug. Like I had been watching, like I knew that was like, when I learned about Bitcoin, it changed everything for me. Like I knew that path was there, and I couldn't just go down the traditional corporate Fed-based system path. Like, I was aware of it, studied all that in business school, did a lot of work in it. We all depend on it. But me just knowing that path was there, I feel like in a lot of ways, I was on the lookout for something like helium. So I think that played a big role into just me gravitating towards, helium and what that meant, the implications of that. I really understood it really quickly.
Sure. So transition to, you learn about helium. What was the catalyst for starting Mycelium, and how did the stars align for you to say, okay, this is really innovative, I'm going to start a business that's in this space? Or how did you even think about wanting to support what was pretty nascent at the time and pretty cutting edge? How did that turn into a business opportunity for you and what you're doing today?
I mean, I think, truth be told, it kind of started with like sheer boredom. It was a really interesting time, the summer of 2020. And so I was really open to a lot of opportunities, and had a couple of mentors who had mentioned that, while the world is like slowing down and stopping, there are opportunities. There are opportunities to move forward quickly, while everybody else is just kind of like hunkering down. And so I was on the lookout for opportunities like that. And when helium came along, I really saw a lot of similarities in the part of Bitcoin and Ethereum and some of the other proof of work projects in the mining part of it. It's like, whereas in Bitcoin, it's very energy driven, proof of work, GPUs, all that kind of stuff. This was mining too, but this was different. This was like, you can't take 200 hotspots and stick them in a warehouse. I mean, you can, but like that doesn't really, work.
Right. Doesn't move the needle.
Right. And so, but I did see that like, really, this is mining. 80% of it is the same. It's just a few small differences. And, those differences are, you're not really optimizing for energy efficiency. You're optimizing for coverage, right? You're optimizing for placing these nodes far enough apart to where, they can provide reliable long distance coverage, but close enough together to where they can actually communicate. I'm here in Northwest Arkansas, relatively new to the area. I'd been here a few years. But this is, if you don't know much about our Northwest Arkansas, it's a really great place, great community, wonderful people, really vibrant culture, and home to 3 Fortune 500 companies. And those 3 Fortune 500 companies are Walmart, which is, global retailer, JB Hunt, which is a huge transportation trucking company, and Tyson, which is probably the largest protein producer on the planet, I think.
Right.
And so, there's this kind of like logistics and supply chain powerhouse here. And, I looked at what helium was doing from the mining perspective, and I was like, okay, I understand this. This makes sense to me. But on top of that, the technology that we were building was IoT. And I just kind of looked around, and that was kind of what, the stars aligned. I was like, all right, I'm here. I got plenty of time. I understand this helium thing, and what better place to deploy an IoT network than, a place like this.
Right.
And so, I called Helium, talked to Mark Phillips over at Helium, and told him that I had this plan to blanket the entire Northwest Arkansas region and all of the campuses of these 3 Fortune 500 companies in IoT coverage. He was like, yeah, go for it. And so we bought a bunch of hotspots and just got started. And that was literally how it began. I didn't actually have plans to launch a company. I just had to do it. It was just take the first step and see where it leads you. And then, nodes started coming online. They started talking to each other. It was amazing. Like, it was just seeing that happen in real life. And then it was like, okay, cool. We've got this like one little area taken care of. We've got to do the whole region. And it was like, well, probably need to start a company. That's where it came from.
Yeah. How long did it take you from deploying a few hotspots to blanketing the entire, and that's correct, right? You guys have blanketed the entire Northwest Arkansas region with coverage, and that's sort of become the test bed for what you're doing at the company side, which we can talk about in a little bit. But how long did it take you to go from, I'm going to deploy these, to actually having that full scale coverage?
Yeah. I would say probably about 12 to 14 months.
Okay.
So we went really, really quickly. The first little bit, it was hard to get hotspots, and then we were also figuring out all the intricacies, right? Like if we think about this like a new way to mine, well, we know some things, but we got to figure out the rest of the 20%. We had to figure out like how to talk to residents, how to talk to businesses, how to, how far apart these things needed to go, how to deal with a mountain in between two nodes.
Sure.
And it was a lot of trial and error. I would say like our first 32 nodes that we put out, that was like the easiest part, right? Like it was friends. It was, businesses that I, went to all the time, for, restaurants, bars, those sorts of things, coffee shops. So that was easy. And then after that, we really had to kind of work through like, what do we tell people? Like, how do we explain this to people? How do we alleviate the concerns that, that there might be security issues or somebody sharing their internet bandwidth, or what exactly is that in my window seal or on top of my roof? And so a lot of that took 6 to 8 months to figure out. And then we just scaled up and we just went for it.
Yeah. What was your pitch, by the way? How did you explain it to people when you were deploying?
Yeah, super interesting. So in the early days, like, my idea was not just to, kind of having that mining background and having done that before, understanding the economic inconsistencies between the inputs and the outputs sometimes. I really kind of wanted I wanted to figure this out for the long term, not just like a spray and pray sort of a thing, not just we'll ROI in 6-12 months and then we'll take the stuff down. It was very much like trying to figure out a model for this for the long term. And that's what really kind of got me about Helium was it's like, if this works, like it changes everything. And if this works, this will be the way that we do things going forward. So, at first it was just figuring out what people's hesitation was. And we really kind of designed a pretty unique host network. Most of the companies at the time that were deploying, or individuals at the time that were deploying, and still, I think to this day, the standard default is kind of like the rev share model. And it's like we split it 50-50 or 60-40, the deployer or the owner of the equipment and the host. But just kind of with my experience in mining, I knew like crypto goes up and down and there was no guarantee. And how many people are really going to want to be converted to crypto in order to host my equipment? So we kind of took a different approach, and this kind of laid the groundwork for a test bed with a host network that could be expansive and really grow and scale in the way that I kind of felt like it would need to in order for it to be worth building. And so we took the crypto element out of it completely. And we just went to hosts and we were like, look, we will pay you in dollars every month to be able to put this equipment there. On top of that, it was not a revenue share model. It was cool. We'll take care of all the crypto stuff. We'll take care of all the, crypto tax related stuff. Like we'll keep that stuff in house for us. So you don't have to deal with it. You just collect your monthly payment, and it was a flat monthly payment. So, we kind of looked at it and it was like, well, what happens when the market goes down? Do we have to tell our hosts that they're going to earn less and less and less? Well, what happens if the market goes up? Like, are we going to be splitting really, really profitable months with them? Like, do they even want that? And very quickly, like with our market research and conversations, we decided, flat rate US dollars and like no surprises. And then we shield the market from those hosts. Like we deal with all of that so that our hosts, they can just collect that monthly payment every month, help us keep the equipment online, and everybody's happy.
Yeah, that seems like pretty sound business plan for you guys to be able to scale up. And so what that led into was your company today. Can you talk about the different components of Mycelium and what you were doing at the host network, and maybe explain to folks who don't know what that is, what that is, and how that's turned into your guys' product offering today.
Yeah. So, I mean, like you mentioned, the first struggle was figuring out how to build our network, right? Build a network of hosts. And, we had at some points, we had a lot of equipment that we needed to get out into host homes, businesses, things like that. At other times, we didn't have equipment, and we had a bunch of hosts who were ready to start earning money. So there was definitely some, growing pains in the early days. But our goal there was to start with the host network, to start with this living infrastructure of people, businesses, commercial buildings, business buildings, residential complexes, just to try to get like that widespread, a little bit of everything over the 1,600 square mile area that we've got. And, we knew that if this works, right, that like more technology would come. There would be other, I guess it wasn't DePIN at the time, it was DY, I guess.
Yeah.
But there would be copycats, there would be other viable projects, teams that saw what worked, iterated on what didn't, and then, came out with the next version or the newest technology of some stuff. But, this way of mining, this way of deploying decentralized equipment was here to stay. And we needed to really build that host network as a foundational layer for everything to come. And so the host network is absolutely the foundation of the testbed. And eventually our region kind of became the testbed. So after about a year or so, we had successfully blanketed the entire region in IoT coverage. So like hundreds of IoT nodes in the area, plenty of redundancy. And, the way that the algorithm worked is like the more generally, like until scaling kicked in, like the more witnesses, the better. And, it was really all in preparation for like what comes next. And in the back of our minds, and the way that we were building Mycelium was, we kind of set up a test bed for Helium IoT. We tested it, we built the network, and then, we started exploring solutions and devices. And we had tags or tabs at the time, which was the one thing that worked on the Helium network. And, from that point, it was just like, what's next, right? Like, how do we design this test bed to facilitate new technology? So Mycelium's mission is to accelerate the world's adoption of decentralized networks. And it's a very broad mission. But as it relates to DePIN, it was, these are the new decentralized networks. This is physical infrastructure to this date at its finest. And so how do we help accelerate this trend in technology? And so our biggest thing was maintain this host network, build it in a way that we could expand outward, make sure it was stable, and that when the market went down, our network didn't go down. We didn't lose hosts. We didn't lose interest, that sort of a thing. And then to prepare for what eventually became the testbed, which is, in some ways an incubator, in some ways a accelerator, in some ways we're just a partner and a friend to DePIN networks, and exploring all sorts of ways to kind of get this technology out there. And, there's really kind of two types of categories of DePINs, and there was more, and I'm kind of oversimplifying it, but there's the coverage side and there's the sensor side. The sensor side leads into like devices and products and consumer friendly, adding to life, like beneficial, things like that help you, or like help you find your pet, or make sure that your beer fridge stays cold, those sorts of things. So, it was really just, and I guess that's where we are now. Like there's a lot of new stuff coming. And so just being able to build the host network, the test bed, all of our partners along the way eventually opened up distribution channels for us as well. So, we're kind of getting into that now and assisting teams that are a little bit more on the device and solution side, not just networks that are putting out coverage, but really everything in between. And so I think that's kind of the next phase for the test bed, is the distribution of a lot of these solutions.
Yeah, that's incredible. And so how are projects leveraging the test bed? What does that look like at a very tactical level for those that are building products that are interfacing with the networks? Can you kind of talk about that relationship, or what that process looks like a little bit?
Yeah. I mean, I think first of all, we're still young. These networks are still young. We're still figuring it out as we go together. But I mean, ultimately we're here to help, right? So we can take that oversimplified approach of coverage networks and sensor networks. And I think for coverage networks, we're we're really focused on the acceleration part of that. I think comparing the two, coverage networks have been around a little bit longer, starting with Helium IoT. There's more of an understanding of that. You can set up coverage networks with, very little underlying infrastructure. You need a good host network or the ability to deploy devices to set up coverage. But coverage networks are a little bit further along in the life cycle. Not to say that there's not new good ones coming, because there are plenty of good ones coming, but we've already got a handful. And so what we've really kind of applied our living infrastructure to, I guess, with these coverage networks is to accelerate them. And, if we've got hundreds of locations and a network needs to deploy, and maybe they want to deploy in a particular area before they go worldwide, before they go global, which is a huge, huge leap. That testing data, the ability to analyze how those nodes or that equipment is performing in a real world laboratory is very, very valuable. And, with our hundreds of locations and our stable host network, we literally have the ability to essentially set up ubiquitous coverage in the entire region overnight. And so that was what it was built for. And so we're definitely talking to a number of coverage networks right now, kind of evaluating which ones seem the most viable and which ones, make sense. And, it could just be 20 locations. It could be 200. But, we have the ability to essentially launch. And then what that means for those teams is they can iterate. They can look at that data. They can see what's working. They can see what worked on paper, and they can see what doesn't translate to the real world. They can look at what's happening in the real world and be like, whoa, we did not see that coming. And work with us to essentially add coverage, remove coverage, change it up, try new things, switch out hardware. And so we kind of look at that as more of an acceleration. For solutions and sensor networks, example being WeatherXM or even IveMapper, which, their goals are more to kind of collect the world's information as opposed to setting up the communication rails for that. Right. And those are either built kind of on top of or alongside the coverage networks. I think their goals are a little bit different. They might be a little bit newer in the developmental cycle. And so in a lot of ways, they're still working on product market fit or UI UX issues, or, who is their demographic, or, who are they going to sell that data to? So a little bit of a different ballgame. And I would kind of group solutions, devices, product services, that, all the stuff that's coming into that category as well. And there we kind of focus a little bit more on incubation. We've got this broad network of locations that are composed of businesses and people. And, it's a real life laboratory with real life happening all around. And, these products and these, these data centric devices are meant for people and for businesses. And so we try to connect all the dots. We try to find, hey, these particular businesses or this type of consumer might be interested in this product. How do we get this in their hands? How do we make it user friendly? How do we, iron out the bumps and make sure that it's ready for market? So acceleration will come there, but we get the ability to really kind of work with the teams at the ground level and really focus on incubation. So yeah, and I think that there's plenty of teams that we're talking to that don't quite fit in either of those categories, but they're still interested in kind of this infrastructure. And I think that more and more we're realizing that the test bed has become a very, very important utility for the entire DePIN space.
Yeah, that real world laboratory example that you talk about is so invaluable for someone that's building hardware that you have to be able to test the stuff in a real live environment. So what would the life cycle look like prior to having the test bed? Is it the onus is on the project to then have to go out and set up the coverage, try to find, get it in the hands of users to be able to test these things? How does that look like? And then, compare and contrast that to what you're doing with the test bed for people that are building projects that are interested in trying to accelerate that effort. What does that life cycle look like for the whole, A to Z setup and completion process?
Yeah. So I think I really kind of look at this as we're entering into the second cycle of DePIN. The first cycle was really led by Helium IoT. And then, a handful of projects and teams that really just kind of recognized and realized what was happening and how they could leverage that, token economic model, human behavior, and really kind of, jumped on the scene. And the second cycle that's just now starting, right? There's a whole new wave of technology, and there will be a third and a fourth and all that kind of stuff.
Sure.
The testbed really didn't exist in its current form during the first cycle. I mean, we were building the testbed, while everything was being tested and experimented. We were learning about stuff, and projects were, doing really well and failing and all that kind of stuff. But I think the easiest way to look at it is, look at Helium IoT. In some ways, they hit it right on the head. In other ways, they got super lucky. I think the first 10,000 hotspots were pretty tough for them to sell. They were figuring out how to market it, who their demographic was, like who's going to buy this stuff, like who cares enough to do this. And then after a while, they kind of figured it out. They kind of figured out who to target. They found me while I was laying rocks. But, it's very much like it just kind of blew up, right? But what we've seen over the last couple of years is it's not that easy. It's not that easy to go from 0 to 100. Like there are stops along the way. And, Helium really did a remarkable job of flying past those constraints. But the reality is that those constraints are pretty real. Like there's a big gap between setting up 10,000, nodes in San Francisco and a couple other places, and then going global. So I think that we really have built the testbed for this next cycle, and really kind of refining that process. And so I think without the testbed, it'd be a little bit more hit or miss for projects. Mm-hmm. I think that it's really, really important to have something like this. And that's why we built it. We built it to accelerate the world's adoption of these decentralized networks. And without it, I think it's just super important. I think somebody would have built one somewhere, because it just makes a lot of sense.
It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. But I think, with it, what we're going to see during this next cycle is it will become more and more a part of the roadmap of these networks. We talk to teams all the time, every day, teams that, are out there with hardware, teams that are just pen and pad at this point, ambitious students who are looking to launch something when they graduate, just everything across the board. And now that the testbed exists, it's almost like a milestone, a proving grounds, not just a testing ground, but a proving grounds for projects. You can really put your project on display for the whole world to see in a controlled environment, which is something that I think more and more teams will just not only find beneficial when they come to the testbed, but plan for it.
Right. In every other business industry, you always have to, you test with the beta product, or you've got sort of an MVP, and in this real world decentralized infrastructure with people and all these different stakeholders, trying to replicate that is really challenging. And so having a place to go, or a way to be able to just set up and start validating what you're trying to do, I think it's a no-brainer. And you're right, someone would have figured it out if it wasn't you guys. And so that's pretty amazing that you're driving that. Can you talk about any projects that you're specifically working with? I know you mentioned HiveMapper and WeatherXM. Or there are some other project examples that you can talk about who have been leveraging your testbed, or just different things that you're seeing as part of that testing process within your ecosystem?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think one thing to point out is that, it's very nascent. The industry is very nascent right now. And we've really built the testbed to be a utility. And therefore, a lot of our focus has been on the objectivity of it, right? Like making sure that it's open to everybody, that there's no politics or anything like that. And so, for that reason, like we kind of try to be really careful about what we divulge in terms of the testing and the conversations and stuff like that. Make sure that all teams have a fair shot at using the infrastructure. But personally, I'm really excited about a couple projects. I think one of the obvious ones right now is Helium Mobile. Being an early Helium guy on the IoT side, definitely seeing the potential in that. There's been a lot of changes. Now, Helium Foundation, Nova Labs, just the whole network of networks, this hugely complex and awesome protocol that's been moved over to Solana. But, I think that when it comes to like bringing it all together, like real world technology, real world, like increasing capabilities, like owning our data, how do we onboard millions of people, utilizing this technology? How do we, and it's not just DePIN, it's Web3. It's like where the world is going.
Yeah.
And I think that Helium Mobile is just one of the best examples of how to do that. And I think that their approach is fantastic. They're figuring out things as they go, just like anything else. But, a lot of the industry, is following Helium's lead, Helium Mobile's lead, Nova's lead, the foundation's lead. I mean, they were the first to the scene. They're pretty far ahead in a lot of things. But I'm super, super excited about Helium Mobile. I think that that's really going to kind of raise the awareness of DePIN quite a bit in a tangible way, right? Like nerds like you and me, we get this stuff, like we nerd out on it all the time. But, like when I explain this stuff to my mom, she's like, cool, I'm glad you're doing great. But for me to be able to sign her up for Helium Mobile and put a hotspot, at her business and kind of explain it to her and for her to actually see it and understand it. I think that they're doing incredible work across the entire spectrum. So super, super excited about that project. And then, WeatherXM is another kind of pet project of mine. I mean, I think in some ways, WeatherXM is kind of like the killer app of Helium IoT, at least for now. I mean, the idea of, in the United States, at least, we have such an outdated weather infrastructure. Like, I think it was all built in like the early 1900s, and there's not that many weather stations, and it's mostly a network of people talking and figuring out what to put in the forecast. But now we've got, hundreds or thousands of weather stations that can be deployed by everyday people, and all of that weather data transfers over the Helium IoT network, and it's built up on it and made possible by it. And what we do with all that data, we can actually watch storms pass through neighborhoods. And I mean, it took forever for my dad to agree to get an iPhone back in the day. He was like, this phone with buttons works just fine. Why do I need an iPhone? And then kind of forced him to get one, and then like try to take that away from him.
Yeah.
And I think it's the same way. Like we're used to knowing that the weatherman is wrong most of the time. We're used to having like a different, like you can stand next to me and we can pull up our like respective weather apps and we're going to get different current weather results.
Yeah.
And I think that that's just kind of become something we deal with. But like, if you really think about it, what can we do if we knew more precisely exactly what the weather was going to be like, or what it was in a particular place, or, it's like when that happens, we can't go back.
Right. I hear you. Everybody can empathize with the weather example too. That's one of those real time pain points. I'm from Seattle, so that was always the struggle. Is it going to rain? You look at the map, it says, yeah, it's not going to rain here. It's going to still rain there, and so being able to try to coordinate is very challenging. When one of the other things that I find so interesting about applications like that is that it becomes part of that stack where it's no longer we're just trying to replicate like a Me Too network. It's actually synergistic with what's already there, what's already working. And that blends back to your test bed, is having that ubiquitous coverage so you can go in and do these test examples. I think it's such a no-brainer, just amazing application. What is the next phase of either the test bed or what you're doing at Mycelium more generally? What does that look like? How does you mentioned there's going to be a third phase. Can you talk through sort of your guys' product evolution and iteration and what that's going to kind of look like in the future for us?
Yeah, I think you touched on it with the stack, right? I mean, up until this point, we've had, I want to say like piecemeal technology. We've got this network, that network. It's kind of, I don't want to say throwing darts at a dartboard, but, figuring out what works and just pushing it forward. And as we enter into this next cycle, this second DePIN cycle, I see it evolving into kind of more of a stack approach, or like a targeted solutions approach. So, right now we've got this test bed, we've got a ubiquitous layer of foundational Helium IoT. We've got a couple other coverage networks that we've got deployed here as well, with products, solutions being built on top and alongside. But if we were to start today, we wouldn't go layer by layer. We would probably go in and bring a stack, right? If we were putting up Helium IoT, there would definitely be some WeatherXM offloading on IoT. Once we've got IoT, there's, HiveMapper utilizes that, Demo utilizes that. And so we would really kind of go in with that whole solution stack, or kind of like, what are we trying to enable, as opposed to protocol by protocol. And I think that kind of leads to, the natural question of like, does Mycelium ever have any plans to expand outside of the test bed? And I think that's a natural evolution of what we're doing. I mean, like I said, there's steps along the way from 0 to 100. And if the test bed is like 25 on that scale, well, then like what's 50 and what's 75? And I think that it's one thing for networks or projects or teams to work on launching something in the test bed and to get this real data. But then this real data doesn't always translate to the next set of expansion capabilities. And like where, we don't have a whole lot of, we're not covered in ice here. There's a particular landscape here. So I think that there's other areas around the globe that could benefit from something like this too. So yeah, I mean, I think if we were going to expand out of the test bed, which seems natural, we would go into those new zones with a planned stack. And I think that makes a lot of sense. Right now, we're really focused on the test bed. We're focused on adding as much value as we can to this next wave of DePIN projects. And, that is going to take place in the test bed. That is going to really kind of unlock those doors. But I think down the road, cycle 3, cycle 4, it makes sense to have kind of a staggered rollout in some new areas as well.
Sure. With that, call it the stack that people are testing on, are there other, over and above having the coverage, are there other sort of resources or utilities that will find themselves being a part of your solution that just enable a faster go-to-market testing as part of that function? Is that how you're looking at iteratively improving the product over time?
Yeah, I think, in the test bed itself, as we work with more teams, there's more kind of non-standard ways that we can help and that we're learning. So implementing that into the test bed, making it as capable as possible. I think one of the things that we're focusing on right now, I mean, we feel really comfortable with our ability to, if we need to add a couple hundred locations, we can do that really quickly. If we need to roll out a network quickly, totally possible. A lot of the products and solutions that are coming to market in the DePIN landscape right now are being targeted a little bit more to consumers. Mm-hmm. So I think one of the keys for us is that we have kind of a sphere of influence. We have a good reputation here. We love our community. Our community really supports us. We couldn't do anything without our community. And so naturally they become interested in what we're doing. They become interested in like how they can get involved outside of just being a host and collecting, their monthly payment. And a lot of folks are actually interested in some of the things that we're working on. And so exposure is an important part of it. When companies do decide to go to market to consumers or to businesses, having a cheerleader on their side, having the ability to speak to the legitimacy of these projects is very important. And then I touched on it earlier too, the distribution channels, whether it's businesses or the Walmart, JB Hunt, Tyson complex here and the hundreds of supporting businesses and things like that, that are kind of in that whole industrial complex that or retail complex that exists here. I think that that's something that we're working on, really kind of bridging into and kind of connecting the threads to make sure that DePIN partners of ours that are operating in the test bed have the ability to kind of go to market in that broader way.
Yeah. How long, it's not a question of if, it's a question of when. How long until you see some of those large scale companies like Walmart, companies like JB Hunt, who are naturally, this is such a perfect solution for what they're doing. When do you see the intersection of what they're doing coming into this DePIN thing? When are they going to start leveraging this? Do you see that in a 1-year horizon? Is it 5 years out? If you're just to speculate for everybody, what's your estimate on the timeline there?
Oh man, that's a super tough question. Generally speaking, and this may be going back to my not liking the corporate word from my early career, but there's so much red tape, there's so much bureaucracy, there's so many levels. Decision makers are hiding behind multiple gatekeepers. I think there's a lot of work to be done there. At some point, the technology, I truly believe that this technology is going to supersede any existing technology. This is just a better way to build physical infrastructure. We've literally figured out the light bulb of building things, building infrastructure, and it's through a decentralized manner, which you can incentivize people who benefit from it to build it. And I think that the innovative, the rate of innovation that kind of comes along with DePIN, that's bound to catch up and exceed the current where we are in the regular technology world. A lot of these systems that these companies use tested They've been around for a long time. They're super secure. They're closed. There's a lot of security, privacy. I mean, I think a lot of making sure that competitors don't get to use the same system. I think there's a lot of that kind of exists at that level. But this really levels the playing field, and I think that when some of these smaller companies start to really get interested in these projects and using this technology, that will naturally put a lot of pressure on the big guys. I think it's happening right now. Definitely know that it's happening. When does boss man at big publicly traded corporation sign off on it? I'm not sure. I don't know. Maybe, yeah, probably between 1 and 5 years. That's probably as close to an estimate as I can give you. But yeah, I mean, I definitely think it's going to happen. There's a lot of work being done. There's a lot of trust building that has to happen, a lot of like use case proof. But the more that the real life benefits are shown, I mean, that's what executives really need. They need to see it work. They need to know that they're not going to, go down a path that's going to end up biting them. It's really just a matter of time, I think. And I think that this is one of the fastest growing sectors and one of the best ways to build this technology. So really just a matter of time. And I think within a couple of years, you're going to really start, probably less than that, you're going to start seeing some big companies jump on board.
Yeah. Yeah. And frankly, one of the things that I've been surprised and excited to see was, companies like T-Mobile getting involved with Helium, both Deutsche Telekom, which is over in Europe at the IoT level and on the mobile side, and then obviously in the US with Helium Mobile. There are Fortune 100 companies that are starting to jump on the bandwagon a little bit. So hopefully that timeline will be accelerating faster than we think, which would be, I think, amazing for everybody, because you're right. It is sort of the great equalizer, and it's going to create a lot of value for a lot of folks that are early on and seeing the power curve. Was there any other updates or just things coming down the pike that with respect to your project specifically that you wanted to share before we wrap it up?
Yeah, I think the thing I'm most excited about, I mean, I'm perfectly fine with the test bed being boring, like not a lot of hype around the test bed itself, because the key to the test bed is the projects, right? That's what, I mean, we're here to highlight what's happening in the test bed. And so, the test bed will continue to be incrementally improved, and we'll continue to take feedback from these teams and try to adjust and expand, our capabilities in order to serve all the new needs. And during this second DePIN cycle, like, I definitely know there's things we're not anticipating that are going to be really beneficial and helpful to our partners. But I think I'm just pumped about what I know is coming. I get the benefit to talk to teams that haven't launched yet. They're working on their hardware right now. They're planning things on particular chains that have not been done before. And it's super hard not to get excited about that. And I think that the highlight of the test bed is everything that's coming in the test bed. This next wave is going to be awesome.
It's going to be huge. Yeah, we're excited for that. Well, you mentioned that you've got folks that are sort of stakeholders in the test bed that are involved. They're listening to what you are talking about. How can other folks that are interested get involved, stay engaged with you at the community level? What does that look like? How can folks stay updated with everything you guys are building?
Yeah. So if you're a DePIN, if you're building something that, works in a DePIN environment, if you have an idea, just contact us. I mean, we'd love to collaborate, brainstorm, help with hardware specs or test hardware. Really any stage of development that projects are in, we definitely welcome you on board. We may not be able to do everything, but we can definitely help in certain ways. So if you have any questions or anything like that, please reach out to us. Check out our website, myceliumnetworks.com. We've got a pretty fun little Discord server, discord.gg/mycelium. And then we're Mycelium X on Twitter. So just get in touch. We'd love to talk to you.
That's great. And we'll be sure to link all that down below. Make it easy for folks to find, get engaged, get involved. I think that's amazing, especially for DePIN projects that are getting ready to launch. This is a no-brainer part of that iteration as folks go to market. So I wanted to thank you. This has been really, really interesting to hear about everything that you're doing. I love, people call it picks and shovels in different industries, especially in Web3. You hear that term a lot, and what you're building is very much a important pick and shovel for folks. So it's incredible to hear about all the progress, how much you're supporting these projects. I just wanted to thank you, and we'll wrap it up there, everybody. I will make sure to link all of those handles, Twitter, website, Discord down below, so you can go and check them out. Again, if you're a DePIN builder, please go say hello. They are good folks over there. Like I said, I've had a lot of great chats with your colleague, and it's been amazing to see just the work that you guys are putting into this, and the passion is clearly evident. So I want to say thank you, and everybody, we'll see you on the next one. Thank you so much.
Thanks.